Hey Quilters, I'm Sarah from Snugglebug Stitching, and today we have another episode of Quilt Tours. So for Quilt Tours, this is a fairly new segment I've started where we just go through and look at some quilts. I had a comment on a previous video a while back asking for some Quilt Tours videos, and the idea of just making one Quilt Tours video pretty overwhelming because I make a lot of quilts. So I've been separating them into different categories. And for today, Quilt Tours episode number 3, we're going to show my quarterly projects from my ambassadorship with Benartex. So a lot of you probably know in 2024, I was super blessed to be selected as an ambassador for Benartex Fabrics. And we had projects to do quarterly. A little bit about that ambassadorship, it was great. I cannot say enough good things about Benartex. So got this stack of quilts here. That was my quarterly projects, and we'll go through and look at all of them. For the quarterly projects, we had 4 quarterly projects, of course, and they were separated into different categories. One category was the tutorial project. One was pre-cuts, and then the other 2 were kind of freestyle, just whatever you wanted to do. And I'm going to look at all of these quilts now that I made for those projects. So let's take a look. Okay, so let's start taking a look at these quilts. Just FYI, all of these quilts are my own design and the patterns are available. I'll put the link to each one in the description in case you're interested. So this first one was my Q1 project, the pre-cut project. This quilt is called Dublin Fancy. It is going to alternate between this block you see right here that's kind of like a postage stamp block. I call it the cube blocks in the pattern. And then there's this block right here that has the 5 pinwheels in it. And in the pattern, I call this the chain block. So this is sort of like a fancy Irish chain, and that's where I got the name Dublin Fancy. Get a little bit closer, take a look at the quilting. For the quilting for this one, I decided to just use some medium-ish stipples. I did do a quilt along for this one and had some special labels made for this quilt, if you want to have a look at that here. So here's the special label that I had made for this quilt. This label is made by my friend Melanie at Southern Charm Quilts. I was able to give her this graphic from the pattern, and she was able to make a label for it. So if you have this pattern and want to make it and want to get a label just like this with your name on it, you can do that, and I'll have the link to that one in the description as well. Now this particular pattern for these cube blocks, when you make the cube blocks, you'll have some units left over, and they were just so pretty when I made this quilt originally that I wanted to not waste those units. So I wrote a bonus pattern to go for those units. And so here's that bonus pattern here. This is called Sound Waves Baby Quilt. This uses up those leftover units from the cube blocks. And I do also have a standalone pattern for Sound Waves Baby Quilt. One of my testers likes to make baby quilts, and she'd mentioned, you know, if you decide to make a standalone pattern for the baby quilt, I'd love to test it. And you know what? I thought that was a great idea to make a standalone pattern for this one because, you know, maybe you just want to make the baby quilt. And so that's available, and I'll link that one too. So here we have my first quarterly project, the pre-cut project, Dublin Fancy, and the bonus project Soundwaves Baby Quilt. That gorgeous fabric I used is Whispering Lilies by Jackie Robinson. Okay, stop number 2 in this quilt tour is my Q2 project for Benartex. This one was a freestyle project. This particular pattern is available for free, and I'll put the link to that in the description. So this pattern for the foreground, I used Color and Light by Anna Nyman. And for that background, that is Superior Solids in Petal. And so I decided to use a more muted color for the background to kind of go with these really pretty super bright colors. And I like how it turned out. This quilt has a really cool modern feel. It's going to use 16 fat quarters plus your background fabric. And for me, I used 2 8 fat quarter bundles. So kind of doubled up, but you can make it more scrappy with 16. And for the binding, this is chalk texture. And also I used a piece from chalk texture on the back. For the quilting for this one, I decided to do kind of small, you see my hand in there to get the size idea, but kind of small stipples in the background. And then in this kind of sort of sashing part of the foreground, I used loops. And then on these squares, I used those boxy spirals. So just kind of had the quilting sort of follow along with the foreground design. And for this particular pattern, I decided to combine my foreground idea that I used for Soundwave This Baby Quilt with a classic super easy pattern to make this pattern, Towers and Tumbles. And like I said, it is available for free, and I have the link to that in the description. Okay, so moving right along, we have my Q3 project. This is called Bonnie's Time Chain. This particular prompt for this one was a tutorial. So I used a tutorial for my hourglass method. Now, in my opinion, this is the easiest hourglass method ever. You do not have to make half square triangles first, and you do not have to draw any lines. But you will end up working with bias edges. So just start your fabric before you cut into it, and that is going to tame those bias edges and make them not so difficult to work with. This particular fabric here, it's so pretty, I love it. This fabric is High Tides by Nicole DeCamp, and then we have in the background here, that's Superior Solids in white. And then on the backing, I've got some more fabric, High Tides, from High Tides by Nicole DeCamp. And then for the binding, I used this chalk texture in red. So a little bit about this particular pattern. Who's Bonnie? So Bonnie was my grandmother off my dad's side. A couple years ago, I decided to start making some patterns that were named after my two grandmothers, and then also 2 of my great grandmothers, and all 4 of these ladies were quilters as well. So Bonnie was the grandmother of those 4. She was the one I got to spend the most time with, and we actually made some quilts together. My first 2 quilts that I ever made were things that I worked on with her, and one of these quilts was a half square triangle hourglass quilt. So I thought it would be fun to do for the quilt I named after her to use hourglass blocks. And so Bonnie, that's where that comes from. The time chain, this is the time block with the hourglasses, and then we got this chain block. So it's going to alternate between an hourglass block and this chain block. I do have this particular quilt, since it was the tutorial and I used my hourglass block, I do have a blog post where I have a sizing chart. This particular method, I have never seen a size chart for this or any kind of blog post tutorial that tells you how you would go about figuring out what size you need. Of course, in the pattern, I've got that done for you, but if you just wanted to make a bunch of these hourglasses and wanted to see what size they needed to end up, or what size they would end up based on what size you started with, or what size blocks you need to start with to get the size you want, I've never seen anything like that. And so the math for that is actually not as straightforward as like a lot of the quilt math you do. I had to use Pythagorean theorem to figure out the size chart for this, and I kind of struggled. I made a whole lot of these blocks trying to figure out what size, like figure out the math, and just made a bunch of them hoping that the geometry would click. And finally, I just asked Mr. Snugglebug Stitching. He's an engineer, so I asked him, watch me make this and see if you can tell me how to go about figuring out the math for this. So I made dozens of these blocks, hoping the geometry would click. And he watched one and said, oh, well, that's the hypotenuse. Like, oh, can't believe I didn't see that myself. But anyway, I do have a size chart for you on this. It's in a blog post. I'll link the blog post. And also I have demoed this several times on Instagram, and I've also got a demo for this hourglass block in on YouTube too. So I'll link that blog post and a demo on YouTube, and I'll also link to the pattern. Okay, so the last top in today's tour is Q3 project. This one was another freestyle. This is my pattern called Forkledoodle. Just a little bit about that name. I know that sounds like a just ridiculous name. So I actually usually name my patterns based on the construction or maybe the fabric that I'm working with. But for this one, I wanted to name it something that really didn't have anything to do with that, kind of just a catchy name. And I wanted to use what I thought was a nonsense word, but apparently it's not a nonsense word because I looked it up and there was already a pattern named that. So I got some help from my little snugglebug to name this one, and he said, what about Forkledoodle? And he said I could use that if I paid him. So I did pay the little snugglebug, and I used this name because I just think it's a funny name and just kind of catchy, and my son helped me name it. So this particular pattern has two versions. We have this version right here, that the little bit scrappier version uses 2 layer cakes. And then this pattern right here, this version right here, the 2-color version, uses all yardage. And of course you can mix and match. You could do a scrappy foreground with a yardage background, or vice versa. You could do a yardage foreground and a scrappy background, however you wanted to do that. This fabric here that I used is Upwards by Kimberly Einmo. So this one, this two fabric version, uses these 2 pieces from Upwards from Kimberly Einmo, and the binding is also from that line. And then we have the backing also from that line, and this one right here uses the foreground from a layer cake from Upwards from Kimberly Einmo. And then get a little bit closer here, you can see that we have a white on white layer cake. This is Classic Keepsakes in white. And I used that same print for the binding, but in a different color. And the backing uses the same print, but in a different color. So this particular design, I was working on something else, just kind of playing around, and I kind of discovered these blocks, and I thought it was a cool block and fun to make, but when I first started putting it together, it just didn't really look like anything to me, and I didn't really notice what a cool pattern this makes until I mocked it up in bigger pieces like you would use if you used a layer cake. So now that I see the pattern, you can't really unsee it. And I'll show some farther away shots of this quilt because you really see that a lot better from farther away. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. But let's just have a look. So we've got this pinwheel here. You won't really be having to make pinwheels, at least not in the sense that you need to make pinwheels. Looking at this whole quilt, it does look like it might be sort of hard, but I promise it's not. You'll probably laugh when you figure out how it really goes together. I do have the link to this. I'll put that in the description. This pattern is available. And I'm going to just go switch over to a shot of the quilts, full shots of the quilts, so that you can see the cool design that they make. Okay, so here we have a little bit farther away shot of Forkledoodle where you can kind of see the pattern that it makes. And like I said, it looks like it might be sort of hard, but I promise you it's not. You'll laugh when you find out how it goes together, and you won't have to make all those things that you think you have to make. You won't have to make pinwheels, at least not how you think you will. Super easy pattern. Actually one of my favorites that I've done, and I love the name. So that wraps up Quilt Tours number 3. For our next episode, we're going to look at my patterns that I have so far with Cut Loose Press. There will be a little bit of overlap. I think there's one of them that we've already looked at, but that's okay. We can look at it again. And so up next, Quilt Tours number 4, my patterns with Cut Loose Press. Cut Loose Press, all these patterns for Cut Loose Press are only $3.99. So that'll be what we look at next.